Hi, I'm sorry I'm dialing to a wrong meeting room. Can you hear me?
Yeah.
Hello? Hello? Can you hear me?
Hello. Yeah, we can hear you.
Okay. Okay, great. Yeah, I think Jessica, Judy, Kelly, Max, Randy, Drew, Ren. Okay, Max and Ren are both brothers. Okay. Hey, Judy. So, yeah, I think everybody. Oh, Connor is not here. Okay. But anyway, I will send message to Connor's mom. Yeah, Connor should be here. Anyway, this is our first class, so I start to share the screen since we have a lot to cover. So let me try it here. Okay, please let me know if you can see my screen or not.
I can.
Okay, great. Yeah, most of you probably already take the previous class, so you have pretty good knowledge about how the Python works, right? But besides Python, we also have something really for a lot of applications. It's called the database. So the database is really something very useful, but from the programming standpoint, it's kind of like on the back end. So if you're thinking about the back end, what we say is that which you do not really see. You will see, okay, you go to the website, right, like this. You go to Google and you do search, and you see this. But you don't really know where this search result gets from, right? Like the COVID-19 news. Okay, so when you search this, you get a lot of results from the Google. So all of this are really not come from nowhere. It comes from somewhere. So the Google, they built the gigantic, huge database, multiple database, to host this information. So that's why when you search, you can get this result. So, but this database, we don't really know where, and we don't really know how they are built, right? So in this class, we will introduce a little bit about how we will get in touch with the back end. So that means the database part. Okay. So this class, the first one, we will cover some very basic stuff, not really a lot, so you don't have to be burned, and make sure you understand some of this basic idea. Something like what's the data, what's the data type, what's the structured data, and what's a database, and different type of database. And also, what's a major database we commonly use, and what's a query, and what's transaction. And we give you a very small database sample project. So don't worry too much about that if you think it's a lot of information. So first is that what is the data? So the data is really everywhere, right? So we get the data every day. When you check your phone, you are really check the data. That's a picture, music, and books, or some kind of painting, or the weather information, or you write a letter. So any other data besides this? Anybody give me some kind of example? Okay, so there are plenty of data. So you should able to find some other data not listed here. So give me something like the student name in your school, right? That's the data. And maybe something about the sports score. So if you watch the game, you know the game has the score and has the team, so that's the data. Okay, so give me something which you know that's data, and you probably use it every day. You don't really pay attention. Okay, start from Ryan. I see Ryan picture here, so that's why. Give me one example of the data. Ryan, are you here?
Yeah.
Okay, so give me one example, which is the data. You can choose from anything from here, or something you know.
Science.
What?
Science.
Oh, science. Okay, science is data. Of course, the science have a lot of data, right? So when you do a lot of science experimental, you get the data. Okay. How about Julie? Give me one example you think is the data we probably use almost every day. Let me unmute you, Julie.
Like
Hey, Julie. Homework, right? Okay, that's great. Yeah. So you probably get homework, and that data you will check. How about Kevin? Kevin C. Can you give me some example about what's the data?
Like a string of text, say a book.
Oh, that's a good example. Yeah, that's really cool. Okay, so yeah, since we have a lot of students, so I don't release one by one. Next round, I will ask you some questions. So you can see the data is really everywhere. Okay, so now we'll move out and say, do you know what's the size of the data? And when we talk about data, it's really specifically transferred to the computer recognizable data. So that means you should able to save this data in the somewhere for computer, right? So if you check this pyramid, you will see the bit is here, and then you have the terabyte. So if you go to the like the Best Buy or somewhere to buy a computer, you probably say, oh, I like to have like 500 gigabyte hardware, or I like to have 1 terabyte hardware, right? So that's referred to here. So that's referred to how big the hardware, the hard drive can host the information. So if you're thinking about from here, 1 bit is really something the smallest represent of the data. So it's either 1 or 0. If you're thinking about that for computer, they don't really understand anything besides 1 and 0. So the bit is the smallest element what they can understand. Then you have legal, which is 4 bit, right? So that's 4, 1, or 0. And you have byte, you have 8 bit. And then you have kilobit, so that's 1024 byte. So you can see this is much bigger than the previous one. But if you compare to this is really 1024 KB. So that means it's really much more than what the KB here. So do the GB, and then they have the terabyte. For hard drive, you can see the terabyte. But for real data in the database, they call petabyte. So that's really another higher level. So it's much bigger. And then they have the zettabyte, they have yottabyte. Okay, that's a whole lot of data. So you don't have to remember all of this. Just thinking about that, the data is really everywhere. So what's really the history of the data storage? Because we have to store a lot of data, right? So anybody here still remember this cassette? Something which is record the audio and playback. Sometimes we use in the car. Probably most of you probably don't really even remember this one, but we still remember this. And also they have some kind of CD, right? So CD is still used, and USB is still here. Of course, now it's more and more popular. It's the cloud, so that means you don't have to save physically by yourself. Actually, it's really accessible. So for example, Google Drive is a cloud, or the OneDrive from the Microsoft is also cloud. Okay. So from the punch card all the way to the cloud. So that's how the data storage was changed over the time. Now we have a quick view of what's a big data. So you think about the data here, and you think about the big data. So what's a big means here? Okay. So the big here not only refer to how many data you have, also refer to how complex this data. If you think about the Google search, they have a whole lot of data. Almost all this information stored in this world, they have the link. So they don't just store this information, instead they store the link of that. But for each section of the data, it's huge. We don't really claim everything is big data just because some of this data, for example, you have the student name for your school. Probably you have 300 students, that's it. And that's not really something we call big data. If you go to check, go to see the doctor, sometimes they will give you the x-ray if you break your elbow, something like that. So the x-ray information is huge. So to the movie, if you watch the movie online, like the Netflix or YouTube movie, something like that, you will really download a lot of data from the remote side. Also, the high resolution picture. Some of this picture is really take millions of pixels. So that's really the big data. Also, the weather information. The weather information here not refer to, oh, what's the highest temperature, what's the low temperature. It's much more than that. They have a lot of like the humidity, and they have different level and different layer of the data. Okay, so the big data has two sets. One is big, huge. Another is complex. So that you don't have to worry too much about that. We just introduced a little bit about different concepts. So this is the common basic data type. So we learn Python, right? Some of you learn Java as well. So you know what's an integer, and what's a float, and what's a boolean, what's a string. So the integer usually it's relatively small, and it's very common to use. It can represent like your age, represent the size of the school body. And the float is really something with a float point, so that you have the decimal point. It can be much complex. The whole float represents something more precise. So if you think about here, 99, it only represents the data in the first two digits. So that's all what you get. If you have 99.999, sometimes you go to buy something, say, oh, this is really something really very pure. So it's 99.99. So that's really from the float. Okay, just understand the concept. And what's a boolean? Boolean is really nothing but true or false. So you either true or false. So that's pretty much like an answer. And string is really everything you can represent, but represent as a character, not the integer, not the float, not the boolean. Okay. So now we talk about what's different type of big data. Of course, this is not only about big data, also about the regular data. If we check the data every day, we know what really that refers to. So in general, the data has been divided into 3 different types just by structure-wise. One is called the structured data, another is called unstructured, and the third one is called multi-structured or hybrid. So let's go through that one by one. You probably get confused a little bit, but don't worry so much about that. So this structured data really means something which you have all this data streamlined and that looks very structured. So they don't really divide into different sections. So let's say if you have something called the Excel file, or you have the CVS file, so that's really something we call the structured data. So in this, we really are going to say each element of that is really a data. It's represented by a data. Okay. So let me see if I can find some kind of information. Okay, so I open a PowerPoint file, and then, oh, sorry, that's wrong. I do not supposed to open this one. This one is not true. Okay. Let me see if I can find it. Okay. We should have plenty of database file, which we can see. Okay. Yeah, I can find an Excel file and I can find the CVS file, so you can see how the structured data looks like. So even include just the text, if it's really formalized, it's called the structured data. But unstructured data is really everywhere. For example, you go to Facebook, you go to Twitter, and you go to watch the movie. All of this data has not been structured. So that means it's not really stored in the row and column. So it's not really very well structured. So you don't really able to see it row by row or column by column. But we also have something called the hybrid. So that's a multi-structured data. Something like the XML. You don't really know that, but it's okay. So for example, I give you the XML example. Okay, so I open this one. So you can see this one. Okay, so you can see all of this are really data you can find its relationship with each other, but they are not really very well structured like the database. So if you're thinking about the CSV file example, it's like this, right? So this one is really very well structured. You have each one, just for example here, you have the first name and last name. So that's in the CSV file. But in the XML file, they have the data and structure, but not really like the row and column. So it's not really like 1 row, 3 rows, 3 row. They don't really like that. So you can consider that as the semi-structured, or called the hybrid. Okay, so do a lot of this data which we collect, like the weather or the currency exchange or the e-commerce. Okay, so if you go to this website, you probably can find some of this data which is really semi-structured. Okay, so let's move on to here. Okay. Sorry, it's getting slow here. So we have to really emphasize and discuss a lot of what's the structured data and what's the unstructured data. It's because, first of all, structured data usually can be stored in the database. Second one is that unstructured data, it's really something we have interest, and we like to get this data and save into the database. Or sometimes not into the database, sometimes save in the file, but it's really structured file. So that's why it's very important. For example, you have the school's information, and you have each student, first name, last name, age, which grade they are, and that's in the database. It's called the structured data. But if you don't really have that in the database, it's very possible that only unstructured data on the website, for example, if your website posts some of this information for the students, they have the student name, but they are not really necessary to be very well structured. So that means they are probably in certain web page, and you have to find it out. That's exactly what we are talking about in the same course. We were talking about how to do the web scraping. Web scraping is really how to get all of this unstructured data and save to the structured. So that means save into the database. Okay, so now let's compare what's really the structured data and the unstructured data. So if you think about that, so here it's pretty much called the structured data. So you have the name of each field. So that means this column is ID, and this is the name. This column is name. This column is age, and this column is the degree. So for each row, it's one person, right? So John has the ID is 1, and his age is 18, and he has the degree in BS. And David, age is 31, and his ID is 2, and his degree is PhD. So do Robert, and Rick, and Michael. So you can see, this is very well structured. So if you want to find who has the PhD degree, you just search, oh, who has PhD degree? So, oh, ID 2, ID 3, the name, age, they pull it out, right? Who has a BS degree? So they can pull the John and Michael. Okay, so we will discuss that for the introduction course. So you just understand what's really structured data really looks like. So what's really the unstructured data? So for example, it's the same thing here. So this university has a lot of students, right? 5,600 students. And John's ID happens to be 1 here. And he is 18 years old and already holds a BS degree. So his age is here, his degree is here. And David has the ID is 2. He's 31 years old and holds a PhD degree. So if you read through this page, you get all of this information. But all of this information, it's unstructured because you do not really able to drag from here to find out who has the PhD degree. You don't have all this information. You're only able to search, oh, I have PhD. They have 2 keywords here, but they don't really know who has the PhD degree because they don't really know which person they are referred to, what's the age for that. Okay, so how do we do that? So when we find a piece of the information like this is maybe come from the web page, right? Or usually it's just a note, somebody send you a file. Say, oh, I have some student here. This is their information. So you can convert from here to here. What I mean convert is not automatically. Just don't really think it's something automatically can be done. It must be use a tool or you have to code it. So now they can convert like this semi-structured data. So at top level, it's university, right? So this university has a lot of students. And then they have the student ID, ID 1. And for this student, the name is John, age is 18, degree is BA. Okay, it's done. For the first student, you can see this is student, this student is N. Now they go to the next student, ID is 2, name is David, age is 31, and he has a PhD degree, it's N. So can we fill in more information to this semi-structured data from here? Anybody can tell me what should be the next student here?
Robert, and he's 51, and he has a PhD degree.
That's great. That's great. Okay, so we have Robert, right? And he's 51 and PhD degree. Great. Okay, so you can see they were able to create something like this. This is much better than this, right? Because from here, you have every information, but no information is related to each other. But here, at least you have group of information grouped by the student. They have the ID, name, age, and degrees. Now the last step, from here, you will go to here. That's much easier, right? Because you have almost one-to-one mapping. So you have the ID 1 here, then you write John's name here, you have its age right over here, and you have his degree right over here, right? So I would say from here, transfer to here is much easier. So to here, you have the second student, the student ID is 2, David, age 31, PhD degree, so on and so forth. So this is a very good example to give you basic understanding about how you get this information. For example, this from web page. Go to the semi-structured data, which is much better than here. But you can do further, right? This is pretty much the CSV file format. And it can also be transferred into the database. I will talk about that in this course, so you don't really have to worry too much about that. So from here to here, or from here direct to here, you can do is that you can do the web scraping. So that means if this is web page information, you want to go to here, you either from here to here and then from here to here, or you can direct jump from here to here. So either way, it's not really super easy, but that's concept-wide. You like to convert all of this unstructured data into the structured data. It may be one step more to convert as a semi-structured data. I will teach you about this part because this is XML. It's very useful, to be honest. And this is structured data, CSV file, or save further into a database. Okay. So anybody have questions about this part? Yeah, I think this is a great example so you can figure out how this class will be held. This is the first part, and then this is the second part. Of course, we're only able to go through the introduction part because database by itself is huge. Okay, so now we are talking about what really is a database. So if you're thinking about the web page, and if you're thinking about the database, whatever we can see, it's really only the, okay, let's say here. So for example, you have the database sample. Oh, it's a whole lot, just give you the structure. I like the simple sample, okay. So what you see from the web page is really something we call the presentation layer. So that means you see all this data. Maybe they are formatted in different ways, but on the back end, most times this information are saved in the database. So that means they are really saved just like this. Each row, multiple row, and they have column. So they can save 5,600 of the students in this database table, right? Okay, so the structured set of the data held in the computer, especially that can be accessed by different ways, that's called database. So you think about the database it sits here, it's really the collection of data, but structured. So if it's not structured, it's not the database. If it's only structured, but not really saved in the computer, for example, you have the file in your school's nurse office, that's not called database. It must be in the computer. And also the support storage and manipulate of data. So that means this is not only the place you store, this is also the place you can manipulate of the data. We were talking about that later. Of course, database is supposed to be easy. So that's something we always have to figure out. How can we make the database access easy and transparent? Okay, so what's really the DBMS? If you go to somewhere, discuss with somebody who has a little bit experience, they will say, oh, I have installed a DBMS as a backend server, something like that. So what's really DBMS? The DBMS refers to the D means database. DB means database. M is management. S is system. So you can think about that. So this is database management system. So it's really referred to a whole set of the software application that's used to interact with the user, also interact with some other application. And the database by itself, it's really used to capture and analysis the data. So you can think about the general purpose of a DBMS is defined. So that means, oh, you know what kind of structure you want to save. It can be create. So that means you want to create some kind of database? Yes. So you can do it. And query. This is really very common. So when we go to the Google, we are not really doing something more than query. So that means you ask the question, you get the answer. So for example, you go to Google and you want to get the answer for something like weather. Weather near 11745. Okay. So if you want to get this information, you send this, you type enter. What's really the give back to you is based on your requirement. So in the back end, they're really handling by the database. So the database sends all of this information back, and then this page will be structured. So it's more user-friendly. So the add something like this icon. So this is much easier to read. But in the end, they are all data. So that's really come from the database to get the data. And also update. So you probably don't really think you update the database, but you are. For example, if you post an Instagram, right? So you post a picture over there. What you really do is that you are really update your Instagram and post one more piece of information. And in the back end, the Instagram server will save that information, whether it's a picture or it's some kind of comment. You save that in the database. So that's really the update. You don't even realize that, but they do have the update. And they also have the administration. The administration really means you can something called the purge. So that means periodically you can delete some of this data or something like the indexing. So if you think it's too slow, you can say, oh, I want to re-index it. Okay. So I know this part is a little bit it's a little bit uncommon for most of this beginner, but I just thinking about that. The DBMS is a very important piece of software which we use to manage the database. Of course, we have different type of the DBMS. Very common one such as MySQL, or the Postgres, or the Oracle, or the SQL Server, or the DB2. And all of these are really very common database. It's called the DBMS. So if you are Oracle here, you have the application which can interact with the database. Or you have some other database. For example, you have a MySQL database. You can interact with the Oracle database. Or you're just a user. For example, you have a user web page. You fill in some information. You can do some query. Okay, you are interacting with the DBMS. But in the back end, they can also interact with the storage. So that means that's saved in the storage as a database. That's a real data. So we call it relational database, a hierarchical database, flat file, object. These three are not very common to save as database. The first one, relational database, is one of the most common database type, I would say that. Okay. So now let's talk about what's a different kind of database, DBMS. So we have this. It's really not very common, but you probably nice to know that it's pretty much like a parent to child relationship. So that means the database really stores the parent's information and child information just as representative. So we don't really use that very often. And then they have the network DBMS is supported by many-to-many relationship. This is only used for the very complex structure. So you think about like each student can go to different class, meet with different teacher. So each teacher can meet with different students at different classroom. So that's many-to-many. So that means it's not one-to-one. It's not really like, say, I have one dad, one mom. So that's one-to-one relationship. And many-to-many means one object has many relationships with a lot of different other objects, like teacher to student. And the relational database. So this is really defines the relationship in form of tables. So it's really known as a relation. So we use this very often. Most of these modern databases are called the relational database. They do not really support many-to-many relationship. Just think about that, because they are not really designed for that purpose. And usually they have the predefined data type. Object-oriented relation DBMS is supposed to be a very advanced technology, but unfortunately, they are not really used very often. We have a few of these popular ones, but most of this object-oriented relations database is not very popular. Okay, now let's talk about what's a SQL. So the SQL is really a programming language based on the relational algebra used to manipulate and retrieve data in the relational database. So think about SQL is only for the relational database. It has nothing to do with some other database. This is a very typical example. For example, you have the student as member, right? And then you can select from the member, and only this age larger than 30. You select this age larger than 30 from the members, select all of this information. And you can also do the update. And you can also set, so that's something which you want to change. The where is the condition, how you can predict and how you can get this information. This is just a very quick example, so you don't really have to worry too much about that if you don't really feel you understand it. So what's a query? The query is really a single action taken on a database. So for example, we send a request, right? Whether the 11354. Of course, I know this refers to the zip code, but they may not really know. So when they get the information like this is a query. So they send the query, and then they handle that and search in the back end. So they have the information called weather. They also have the information called 11354. And 11354 is really the zip code. So they can use the combination of weather and 11354 as zip code. They can retrieve what we say. They can also say, they can pull out the database information. So typically we use something like select, insert, update, or delete. So you can think about, oh, this is try to search some information. This is try to add some information. And the update, of course, is used to update some information, right? And so do here you have delete. So that means you don't really want some information, you can delete it. So let's go back to Instagram. So for example, you go to Instagram and you cannot hear me? Okay. Are you able to hear me? Yeah. Okay, great.
Yes,
So for example,
I can.
Okay, great. Thank you. If you open an Instagram application on your cell phone, and sometimes you want to say, oh, I want to find my friend's picture, but you have a lot of friends, so you can type in the name, and then you can find your friend. That's a select, right? So for the same Instagram application, what's the insert? Somebody can give me the example? So you open the Instagram app on your phone, and then you want to do some insert. What are you doing over there? So maybe you don't use Instagram, so we can use some other example like Facebook. I doubt you are really a lot of young kids I know they use Facebook. Okay, so that's why the Instagram is it's the right choice. So for insert in the Instagram means you want to post your picture, right? So when you post your new picture, let's really insert something into the database. You don't even realize. So do the update. For example, you have something post a couple of days ago, and then they have no comments. You write a comment about 2 days ago. Now you think, oh, that comment is not appropriate. Then I want to change the word for that comment. So you go over there and update. So that's an update. Or you can totally delete that comment. Okay. So we use query to describe a request from a user for information from a database. So that means when you send a query, all of this are query. You are really send a request from user sent to the backend database. Something like, hey, TextBot, can you give me the name of all tools in the range drawer? So something like this. So they will say, oh, what's your tool's name from the range? Okay, so that's a select. Just like what we select from the Google. Please tell me what weather near 11354, right? So that's really the query. Okay. So what's really the transaction? So since we have something called query, and we don't really know whether it can be finished or not. So the transaction, it's a little bit hard to understand, but I will explain to you. So a transaction is really a whole sequence of operations. So that means a sequence of queries that make up a single unit of work performed against a database. For example, Rob paid George $20 in a transaction. So it will have two different parts, right? So Rob's balance, Rob has account, George has account. Rob's account balance will reduce by $20. At the same time, George's bank account balance will increase by $20. So these two steps put together become the transaction. So the transaction, you can think about, it's really multiple queries, but they are really grouped together. So now this is an example. So you want to register credit sale for 100 units of product X to customer Y for 500. So you will update the product. You say something, oh, I minus 100 because I sell 100 units. Now I will update the account, and then I receive the money, 500 from Y. Okay. So they have the state of both transactions. If you're thinking from here, say Robert will minus his account balance by $20. At the same time, George, his account balance will add $20. So two of this finish, that means finish of the transaction. So the transaction is really, think about, it's a group of the query. What you want to do, it's one action, another action put together to become a transaction. Okay, anybody have a question here? Yeah, I know if you don't really remember that, it's okay. If you don't really fully understand that, we will repeat the same concept again and again. So this is only the first class, so you don't really have to worry too much about that if you get confused a little bit. Okay. So now let's talk about what's a ACID. Okay, the ACID is really something very hard to understand for the beginner, but it's very important. That's why we bring it up in the first class. We don't really like to repeat some very hard concept without giving you the chance to repeat it. So this may be the first time we talk about ACID, but you will get this multiple times. So we're already talking about what's a transaction, right? So in the previous page, the transaction Rob paid George $20 in a transaction that has two parts. Rob's bank account reduced $20, George's bank account increased $20. Okay, but thinking about that, if you go through the bank, what's a very important part of this transaction is you either finish the transaction or you are not really doing it at all. So this part means atomicity. So that means each transaction is all or nothing. Thinking about that, Rob gave George, transferred $20 to George's George's account. It's either finished, so that means Rob's bank account deduct $20 and George's bank account have increased $20, or it has nothing, so that means Rob didn't really decrease. His bank account balance didn't decrease, and George don't really increase. So it cannot be done something like, oh, I want to finish this transaction or transfer $20, but oh, wait, the only transfer is $5 and then the start over there. No, that cannot happen. For database, each transaction is unique and atomic unit. So that means it's either fair transaction, so that means it didn't do anything, or it's complete. So that means it complete both sides. It cannot be done by the halfway or somewhere in between. So you cannot say, okay, I want to transfer $20 from Rob to George, and I only transfer $10. Another $10, I don't really know where. It goes nowhere. It cannot be done like that. It must be either all done or nothing has been done. So that's very important part of the transaction. And the second part is the consistency. The consistency means all data write to the database is subject to some of this rule defined. So, for example, if they have the database which must be indexed user ID, so every time you write the new transaction, you have to not re-index. You have to keep in mind you need to keep the index consistent. So that means you have one index which always keeps track of that. And also the isolation. What the isolation means, you change the transaction, it's not visible to other transactions until the complete. So, for example, you transfer money from Rob to George. You should not really finish this transaction, which can be seen or even go to a wrong account. So the Rob money cannot really say go to Amy's account. That doesn't make sense. So the isolation is very important. So it's only within its own transaction. And it also has something called the durability. Durability really means you complete the transaction stored and available in the database, even in a system failure. So this is a very high mark. It's pretty much like something say, you want to complete all this transaction and even your database was crashed, you want to store that. So a good question is that if my database was crashed, how can you store that? That's a good question. So that means you're doing nothing. So it's really doing everything or doing nothing. For durability, it's very important to consider that. Okay. So now let's talk a little bit about schema. Schema is really a skeleton or structure of the database. So it's pretty much like a blueprint for how the database is constructed and how things relate to each other. So if you're thinking about that, you have the course database, you have the student database, you have the grade database, you have the relationship between these different databases. Okay, so that's really put together. It's called a schema. Again, this is some kind of new term, so you don't have to worry about that. Some of the schema are static, some others are dynamic. So you just need to understand this. Okay, now let's go to the SQL Online. I give you a very quick touch of how the database really looks like. Okay, so you can try it by yourself. Because I have something, but really means everything is really good. Okay, so I have a demo account, and then I can select, I can run. Okay, so this is the demo account. Let's see. if I can show you a little bit more of the information. So they have 3 different columns. So they have the column ID. So this is the first column, the ID. They have the second column is name. They have the third column is hint. So you can see secure online for date stamps. So that's a hint. They have the ID 1, right? So now you can say select where ID equals to 5. Okay. So now the returning only 1 and say, oh, ID equals to 5, and then the name is multi-version, and then the hint is like this. So this is a very simple and straightforward database. If you register online, it's free. It's called the SQLiteOnline.com. But we will discuss something much more than this. This is just give you some very quick example. And so do here, if you want to do something like, okay, for example, besides select, you can also add row. Okay, so you can add row because this is a tool. It's not a SQL. So for example, you have 200, and then you have something you want to write into my database, and then the hint is that course hint. Okay, so now you can see everything you write here. This is 200. We just wrote, right? They only have 20 rows, but now you add 1 more. So if you want to select then where ID equal to 200, right? The return whatever I just get, right? Or you can say, I want to delete it. I want to rename it. It's perfectly fine. You want to delete from the demo? Okay, I don't delete it because this is really something. Oh, I can delete this one probably. Okay, let me see. Okay, I can delete this 200, and then I select again. I go to this select. Oh, I delete everything? Jesus, that's my bad. Okay. I hope I don't really make that mistake. But anyway, you get the basic idea. So if I want to insert, I can insert, say, okay, wow, now I have nothing on my database. And then first hint. Okay, so I have 1 here, right? Okay, I made a mistake, I delete everything. So you get a very basic idea about how the database looks like and how we will use that and what's the data, what's the big data, and we go through a lot of this common information. And I know it's a lot, but you don't really have to worry too much about that. We will go through the details one by one in the coming class. So I will give you some very simple assignment. Hopefully you can finish that and warm up. And if you have any questions, please let me know. We also use the Google Classroom, so please log into the Google Classroom and then try to, let me see. If you don't really join the Google Classroom, please ask your parents to check the WeChat group have that. Let me see if I have that Google Classroom information here. Okay. Okay, here. So in case you want to write down, you can write it down. So this is really the class code. So you can get this class code and then join the Google Classroom. Again, we will post the PDF file, or we will assign the assignment over there, and everything should be done over here. And you should able to ask me questions, and I will get the answer to you as soon as I can. Okay, this is what we covered for our first class, and hopefully you can enjoy. If you don't, try to relax. It's a little bit hard, but not really too challenging, believe me. Okay, Thank you so much, and you have a great weekend.
Bye.
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 Bye.